Hi everyone, this is Shauna Tarosa, RAYAC Executive Officer, and this is my desk. In this monthly video cast, we go over questions that are coming across my desk every single day so we can have much smoother real estate transactions here in York and Adams counties. So as guests of or as viewers of this video cast, you will know that I frequently say that I am not an attorney and I do not play one on TV. But our favorite guest is back with us again. We have RAYAC solicitor Peter Ruth, who is an attorney with Stock and Leader in downtown York. Peter, welcome back to my desk.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Yes, you are a frequent request. Bring Peter in to talk about these issues. So we're glad to have you here. So the topic that we have today has to deal with inspections and what do those contingency dates really mean in the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors Agreement of Sale. So let's just dive right into it. So a little bit of background. You're a realtor and you're utilizing the PAR Agreement of Sale and you have a buyer who has elected to conduct a property inspection and a water test, let's say. So how long does the buyer have to complete those inspections?
Great question. And just as a reminder, we're talking about the form ASR, the PAR form, and what that provides. So in this instance, and I refer to this as the 10-5-2 rule. So in that case, unless the time period would be modified, that buyer effectively has 10 days from the date the contract is signed to complete all of the inspections, get all of the reports back from the inspectors if there are multiple inspectors for different types of inspections. In this case, they would likely have one from the property inspector, the whole house inspector, and then another one from the water service to confirm what was going on with that. And they would have 10 days from the date that they signed the agreement to have all those done, get back the reports, and provide them to the seller, really to the listing agent, before the expiration of that 10 days. So let's assume February 1st was the date they signed the agreement. February 2nd would be day one. So they would have that 10-day time period starts then. And remember, they have that full contingency period to complete those inspections. So although they might have several different inspections completed, the whole house in this case might come back within a day or two. The water inspection likely is going to take a little bit longer. So in that case, agents should likely be, reaching out, maybe trying to find out what those timelines look like. And more importantly, as a seller, you might be receiving multiple BRIs as a result of different inspections. So a whole house inspection might result in, hey, there's some mold in the basement that needs to be alleviated. And the water test is going to have something completely different. They might be bundled together on a BRI depending on the timing. They might not be. So you just have to be aware of that. And likely a good recommendation for your listing agents is wait until, as we'll talk about here, until your negotiation period to really decide what it is that you want to do as a result of all of the BRIs that you might receive in that time period.
All right. So one of the things that you brought up, we're talking about multiple inspections here. And so one of them is environmental, so water tests. So typically those water tests, they come in, they take a sample of it, they have to send it away.
That's correct.
To a lab, which probably is going to take more than 10 days.
That's right.
So would you suggest that a good practice tip would be to make sure if that they are getting any of those environmental testing that they may want to extend that 10-day period from what it defaults to in the contract?
Absolutely. Great practice point. And I really think, not just for your environmental things, but if we're going to look at really all of them, you have the whole house inspection, which is your HVAC, your structural components, looking for mold. There's a radon inspection. There's a property boundaries inspection, a deeds, restrictive covenants, and zoning type of an inspection or contingency that you can elect. Lead-based paint is another one. So depending on the type of property and really what type of an inspection you're looking to get, it could take a little bit longer than 10 days for a lot of these, not just the environmental ones. A great example is if you're looking for deed restrictions, unless you're just going to do a really quick kind of review of the title without doing a full-blown title search, you're likely not going to get that back within 10 days, okay? So that's, again, looking at that timing, especially for your environmental. Anything outside of the ordinary, I would say, you want to build in a little bit of a buffer. And really, I think the best practice point is reach out to the inspectors, if you're the buyer's agent, to help them understand, hey, whole house is going to be done within a day or two, but it's going to take a little bit longer for your water, for example, or for your on-lot septic and things like that. So be aware of those timelines because, again, they're set in stone. So.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Good tip. Check with your local RAYAC affiliate to make sure you have those timelines in place. But what about, let's say I thought I was being a good buyer's agent. I thought I had the right day selected, but outside of my control circumstances happen and there's a delay in the completing the inspections and I'm not going to get the results back within that contingency period, can an extension be requested?
Absolutely. You can always request an extension. And honestly, I think, the earlier you do that, the better. Because I think a seller is going to be much more willing to entertain that potentially if they get that maybe on day 2 rather than on day 10 saying, oh, wait, sorry for the rush. But to that point, it can be requested. It doesn't have to be granted. So that's where you have to be very careful because, again, you need to have that the reply back to that seller within that contingency period. So if you're in day 11 and you haven't done anything yet, you could be in very hot water if you haven't received that extension. So that's where it kind of bumps down into the ways that you can respond if you haven't gotten that and they're not willing to grant the extension. That's where you need to really pursue that in earnest to make sure that deposit money's not at risk.
Perfect. And so if they're going to grant the extension, we would do the CTA, the change in terms agreement, and you want to make sure that it's signed within the contingency period for the extension or it's not valid.
That's correct. Yeah, just because you're negotiating an extension of that time period or talking about it with the listing agent, again, if that day 11 comes, that's too bad. Kind of what we say, too bad, so sad, that there's no obligation for them to come back and say, oh, well, wait, we were talking about it. You said you were sending it over to me. You said that the seller was considering it. It doesn't matter. It should be in writing. Or the default is you send your termination notice. So.
Got it. Well, and I guess that's it. So, we're at this point. The inspections aren't completed. The seller's not willing to entertain an extension. We're outside of the contingency period. What has the buyer have at this point?
So really, hopefully they have some other contingencies in the agreement, but as it relates to the inspections under paragraph 12 and 13 as they're executed, you've effectively waived those. So you have no ability based on the contract to go back and ask for any type of an extension at this point. Again, or you can request that, but no obligation to grant that. And more importantly, you have no right to even terminate the agreement of sale to protect yourself if the seller's not willing to do what you're asking, or more importantly, if the seller's just non-responsive. So that's the other thing you have to keep in mind.
Okay. All right. So let's say in the perfect world, I've gotten my inspections completed. I provided those reports to the seller within my contingency period. Now what do I need to do as a buyer?
Yep. So that you would have had all that done within your 10 days. So now we move into that 5-day, we'll call it. So just a little caveat there, if you're talking about an expansion or replacement of on-lot septic, that there's a little bit of a different timeline, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. But so we've now moved from our 10 days into the 5 days. And remember, it's not after 5 days that starts after you've signed your CTA. It is 5 days after the contingency period. So it's 5 days after the 10. You get the full 10 days. Now you move into what's called a negotiation period. So the buyer has done what they need to do, completed inspections, provided reports, as well as the BRI, we'll assume in this case, to the seller, asking the seller to do certain things, maybe make a financial concession, maybe to fix certain things prior to settlement. So that gets to the seller. The seller then has 5 days to work with the buyer. Now this can be over the phone via the agents. This can be by way of sending BRIs in writing that are revised and amended between the parties before they reach an agreement that is memorialized in the CTA and then signed by buyer and seller in the CTA. But that's really what's going on in that 5 days, is we're trying to figure out whether or not the buyer and seller can meet minds as it relates to the request that the buyer has made in the BRI. Now remember, the BRI is only signed by the buyer. It is not part of the contract. It doesn't become part of the contract because the seller doesn't sign it. The CTA that memorializes what the buyer and seller agreed to in that BRI does become part of the contract, does go to the lender, does go to the title insurance company. So that's where you really have to make sure you're using the right form at the right time, signing the right form at the right time to make sure you're compliant with what the law requires. So 5 days comes, and let's say that the seller just is non-responsive and they say, I know I've received your BRI, I'm not willing to do anything. At the end of the 5 days, you enter, we call it the drop dead period, where that's the buyer has 2 days from that day, the 10-5-2, to decide, do I want to buy this and take it in its as-is condition without any concession from the seller, or do I terminate the agreement and get back my deposit money? So that's the 10-5-2. That's what's going on during that timeline.
Okay. All right. So and if they don't agree during that negotiation period, you're saying that the buyer then, after the 5 days, has the ability to either accept it and sign as part of the release in paragraph 28, or they're going to terminate and get their money back.
That's right. Yep. And if they don't do anything, let's say they wait, or they're talking, and we'll say that the seller or the listing agent might have reached out and said, well, we're still considering, maybe signing, doing something like that, but they don't have an extension. Once day 3 comes, the buyer's taking the property in its as-is condition. Okay.
Yeah.
Unless, again, there might be another contingency as by way of condominium or a planned community or something along those lines. But absent that, again, there's a waiver involved. You've agreed to the property regardless of anything you've requested from the seller. So have to be aware of those timelines and pay close attention to that.
So when the contract says time is of the essence,
it means it. Yep.
It absolutely means it. So any other tips regarding this 10-5-2 rule?
Yes. So coming along, it's kind of to depart from that, anything dealing with on-lot septic. So let's say you have an on-lot septic that's been inspected, and the report says it either needs to be expanded or replaced. Now, it's very important. It says existing on-lot septic, and the report indicates expansion or replacement. So again, anything outside of that as it relates to a septic test is not going to apply in this instance. But in that case, the buyer, again, still has to have the report completed, provided to the seller within the 10 days. The seller then, though, has 25 days. So it's a 10, 25, 5 rule, believe it or not. The seller has 25 days to really consult with professionals, develop a proposal for that expansion or replacement, provide it to the buyer. Once the buyer gets that, the buyer has 5 days to determine, and really at the expiration of the 25 days, they'll have the opportunity to pursue whether or not they want to buy the property as a result of that response. Now, if there is no response, they have the 5 days to terminate within that time frame. Again, termination outside of that, they're outside, they've waived, and they're now obligated to buy the property in the as-is condition. So just be aware that, again, this is all a timeline mechanism. The best thing to do is have your checklists in place. So contract start date, when do we need to have everything submitted by, and then set your calendar ticklers accordingly. So that way they're popping up and you're not missing them. Again, nothing you can do to force the seller to accept an extension, right? You can always request it, but nothing you can do to force that. So.
Okay. And another tip too might be that when you're drafting this original agreement of sale, you need to keep these dates in mind if we need to increase the contingency period from the default of 10. But B, also keep in mind that ultimate date at the end of the settlement date.
That's right.
Because if you're putting in a 30-day settlement date in your agreement of sale, and we have the 10, 5, and 2, and we have problems that come up or extensions in there, then it doesn't automatically extend the settlement date without a change in terms agreement.
Correct. Yep. So again, be very mindful. And that's why that checklist really works for you if you can do that, because you'll see all the other dates that flow from that. And are they really feasible? Instead of having to kind of piece through the contract and remember, where the closing date is and when that falls in line. But yeah, I mean, it's a date-driven form, and it's a date-driven process. And 10 days, that's 10 days. That's not 10 business days. That's not 10 non-holidays. That is 10 days. So many things are not going to be done over the weekend. Some things maybe, but so you always have to be factoring that in, especially having just passed the holiday season. It might be difficult to get an inspector out, especially with how cold it might be, to do some of the tests that might be required. So
perfect. All right. Well, as always, we appreciate you being part of our conversation and educating our members. I think that was very, very helpful. And hopefully it's very clear that time is really of the essence when you're dealing with these contingency period. So thanks so much for being here. And as always, if you ever have any questions that you would like me to address, please feel free to reach out to me, because my doors and ears are always open to you. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.